those are good, historical pictures. Okay. The community section, though, in the, in the plan, we talk an awful lot about the people that are here, and that the strength in the community is really in the people and in volunteerism and whatnot. There's your photo for the sculpture walk, for example, because that is right up to date. Okay, and then of course the fishing derby always as an annual event is probably one of the longest running annual events.
I think that's one of the ones that's been added to the list.
As far as
it's always nice.
community life, yeah.
As far as community life is concerned.
Pictures of the half cloud.
The other piece would be, a picture of the highway garage in terms of
In the whole facilities.
in the whole scheme of things. Our goals where we see the town needing, to update facilities. We're heating the outdoors, as we all know, and I don't know how you depict that, but you get the point.
It's funny, I remember when the Space Station Committee
Well, you
first-
depict that when we have 3 feet of snow and there's none on the top of the...
Right. The only roof in town
Only
that
roof in
doesn't
town
have
with
any
no
snow
snow.
on it.
I thought at one point the Facility Needs Committee had that as number 1 on their list. I could be wrong. I'm sure they zeroed in on the police station pretty quickly, but
Yeah.
I think that was.
I'm not sure it was one. I mean, I think, the police, fire, and DPW were all major facilities that they had looked at. I'm not sure what the order of events was, but if you can remember what the police department worked out of.
Oh, yeah, no, that's where I think that quickly became number 1.
But when we get to the facility section, we haven't done any work with that yet. I mean, I've roughed out some stuff, but we don't have anything to give you yet. But we'll certainly highlight the work of the Space Needs Committee, those recommendations, the implementation of those recommendations in the last 10 years. And then that sets the stage to say, okay, what are we looking at in the future? Certainly DPW, the library's done a lot of work on their master planning and that kind of stuff will all get highlighted.
Sure. Well, as we have with the schools.
Yeah.
They finished their master plan.
Yeah, there's a bound document. I think my guess is still probably some ongoing work.
Okay.
But I haven't.
But we incorporated their goals into our document.
Once I dive into that one, we've spent
Yeah.
our most recent time getting ready for tonight, and we'll talk more in depth on natural resources tonight. But I think in the for the March meeting, community facilities and utilities, and so we've started a little bit of work on that, but we're not in a position to really get into that until we spend a little more time with it. But you're right, that's what we'll be looking at.
And the school is done.
We're in a good place on facilities,
Yeah.
obviously, and utilities too, for that matter.
The school was recently completed.
Yeah, and that's in the stuff we've done. We've sort of introduced that both in the vision statement in terms of the importance of public education and I think the community life will reinforce the strategic work that they're doing. Ed, were you here when we adopted the 2002 plan? Were you on the board at that time?
No.
You became a member, I think, right when
I think I became
wait.
a member in
07?
07, I believe. Yeah.
In as much as this is an update, as Tom was saying, depending on how tonight goes, we've developed some new fresh maps for the master plan in the natural resource section. And so knowing that Ian and Ed and Tom weren't here in 2002, if time and interest permits, we could spend a little more time with some of these graphics that we've prepared, give you a little bit of a little tutorial about the town through our lens, through the mapping side. We have in-house GIS capability. We've generated a bunch of different maps to, to analyze the community from a bunch of different perspectives. And there's some interesting takeaways there. And, some of it, what's difficult is sometimes when you're in our fishbowl, some of the stuff is obvious because it's things that we live and breathe every day, but to yourselves and certainly to people that are not as intimately familiar with the community, we want this to be very informative for them. And that's sort of the way we're writing this. We're writing it from the point of view that if someone didn't really know anything about the town, okay, what's going on with our demographics, what's going on with our natural resources, that kind of thing. So we're trying to, so it's meant to be a little bit informative and educational, not just, dive into how can we regulate someone's life. I think there's as much of an educational and a public awareness objective as much as anything else.
Why don't we get out the plans and have a look at the plans?
The maps?
Maps.
There's the first one.
Yeah.
You want to just sort of, and I don't mind if we repeat this. Do you want to just get into it a little bit, Bill, or do you want to?
I mean, we could wait to get into the plan when Ann gets here. We could just check out the maps and what they show.
Knowing that
because I think you guys have updated these some. I mean, I don't recall seeing that.
That's
one.
brand new.
These are all new,
Right.
that's why.
Yeah.
Well,
And
the
some of these-
land use is not new, you've seen
Right,
those.
that one I've seen that.
But a couple of these we've made. We're not
But the
putting
natural
all of these.
resources
We're
is
probably
not.
not putting all of these in the plan, but some of these were things that we've done to analyze what's going on. So
I keep saying, have an appendice that maybe is available on a DVD or something like that. I really am strongly in favor of, and all these, we reference this document and that to the extent where we can reproduce them. Like I say, either on a DVD or on the website to link and all that. I think that's great. I mean, it doesn't have to be, like you say, the document doesn't have to be 2/3 maps in it.
and as we get further along,
Yeah, but I think you want the maps in the document
Some-
that you're
some-
actually
a
making
couple,
reference to.
Some, yeah.
selected list.
Some, but I think the others too, I mean, a lot of cases would be nice to have
That's great.
linked to or available.
It's a great resource. I mean, in my work as an appraiser, a lot of times I'm looking for different maps like that, and some towns have them online, and some scan paper documents in to create a PDF, and it looks horrible, so to have a digital copy available would be nice, whether it's just a link or...
Yeah. So the hope is, I think, when we publish this, and have it available electronically, that it would be, you have the PDFs in different sections and the PDF of the corresponding maps all separate. So it'd be pretty easy to navigate. So one of the natural resource recommendations, or one of the areas of emphasis in 2002, talked about the importance of watersheds as a framework for managing water resources. And the 2002 plan emphasized that many watersheds are shared, and this is a framework we should move forward with. And the 2002 plan basically recommended that we focus on Lake Waukewan's watershed as our first priority, Waukewan being the town's water supply. So let me just orient you a little bit here.
That map is oriented a little differently than what
This is
most of
oriented-
us are used to looking at.
What we've done to format all of our maps to fit conveniently on a board, we go left, right on the map. This is still north, so rather than the town being oriented north, the town's oriented left, right, and the north is skewed a little.
Otherwise, the town would shrink.
Otherwise, we'd
To
have
get on
issues
a
trying
diagonal,
to
you'd have
fit
to-
things in the space provided. So just keep in mind that there's your north orientation. Okay. So this just shows the town, as you're reviewing it, just left to right. So this is Meredith right in here. And so the purpose of this map, as it ties back into the plan, is high altitude macro understanding of the context that our town sits in from a watershed point of view. Okay, that's its purpose. So in every watershed context, you are either draining into somebody or receiving drainage from somebody. It's either one or the other. So in that regard, if you're receiving drainage from another town, there should be motivation to work with the town, the upstream towns, to make sure they're not negatively impacted you downstream. And then conversely, if we're the headwaters to somebody else, we sort of have a stewardship responsibility to work with people because we're having an effect on our downstream neighbors. Okay? So this is, when our mapping guy was working with us on this, his reaction to this map that we created together was, geez, it's, you know, what was it, what did he say? It's, you know, it's all about the water. And that sort of jumps out of you at this map. So what you see are surface water. This is Winnipesaukee, Alton Bay, Wolfboro, Waltonboro, this is Center Harbor, this is Meredith Bay. So this is the big lake. All of this orange shade is area that if water hits anywhere in this shade, it goes into the lake. So this is the Lake Winnipesaukee watershed. And one of the challenges from a regional point of view is that when you look at how many towns have a piece of the pie, that it's like herding cats to try to get everybody to ultimately understand and appreciate this resource and work together. But anyway, so that's that. There's this little bit of town right up near where Angela lives on Keyser Road that is just in the Squam watershed. So what we've done is we've extended that out to show you what that relationship is. So this is Squam here that drains the Little Squam, eventually makes its way into the Pemigewasset River. So this goes in a completely different direction than the yellow. All of this piece in the middle is Winnisquam. This is Lake Winnisquam right in here. And so up where we are, this is Lake Wickwass, and you have Blake Brook, Dolph Brook, Hatch Brook, Millbrook. These are our brooks in that part of town. So we're in the very upper headwater portion of the Lake Winnisquam watershed in this purplish color. And so all of this drains through Wickwass outlets here, and eventually into Winnisquam. Winnisquam ends up going through down to Silver Lake in Belmont, and then eventually ties in.
Winnisquam takes the water from Paugus and Saunders.
Yes, yep. Well, Paugus
Right.
is right there. Yep, and this is Paugus Bay. Paugus Bay is technically considered part of Lake Winnipesaukee. But anyway, and so so this is the Winnipesaukee River, goes through Tilton, and where the Pemi comes out of the White Mountains and the Winnipesaukee River comes from here in Franklin, that forms the Merrimack. And from that point south, it's the Merrimack River.
To Newburyport, Massachusetts.
Yep. So the other layer that you have on here are all these blue lines. And I often refer to, you know, kind of the water as our circulatory system. You know, so you have bigger arteries and smaller veins and so forth. And this hydrography layer really demonstrates that. So the thinnest blue lines, these little guys here, and we see quite a few in Meredith, they're first order. Those are basically your basic stream, just a stream straight shot into a water body. When a first order meets another first order, the confluence of that constitutes a second order, a little bit bigger stream. And then when a second meets another second, it constitutes a third order. And so the line weight on the plan has increased based upon the order of magnitude, if you will, of the surface water. So the Pemi and the Winnipesaukee River, these are meant to jump out at you on this plan so that you see this river and that river confluence in Franklin. So from our point of view, we don't have a lot of second and third order or fourth order streams. We are mostly headwater first order streams, as evidenced by these little thin lines. An exception here is the outflow of Page Pond, a little bit of Hawkins Brook, and these guys where you see a little confluence together and the line weight thickens up a little bit. You know, two first order, second order, second order, second order. But if you think of it in terms of arteries all the way down to capillaries, you kind of get a sort of the water view of a circulatory system in terms of the order of magnitude of the surface water. So that's what this shows. It's the hydrography of the stream waters, surface water, and then the general large basins that we participate in one way or the other. And so we've just labeled some of the larger features.
Boy, I would challenge that compass heading there, John. But obviously this has been done by the professionals, so, but that doesn't look like north to me. That looks very close to east.
Well, sunrise is over the big lake. If you're in downtown Meredith and you're looking at the sunrise, you're looking down this way.
See, if I take your pencil, seriously, because my home is right there, and, I'm sorry, is right here. And if I look just by Loon Island, if I go that line right there, that is east. That pencil is east-west.
We certainly can double check it then.
Well, line it up north-south. See how it looks.
Let me tip it.
Yeah, tip it, yeah.
So I would say, I'm saying that north is, okay, let me just get my bearings again here. That north is more there. Okay.
Pretty almost up and down.
Pretty much where it's pointing at.
Yeah, it's pretty close to it.
But, oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's good.
Can I have that pencil again, John?
No, really. What the hell am I talking about? No? Okay, if that's Pine Island, that's Loon. Okay. I look right out across it. Okay, that's an easterly, that's
You
east.
think that's east?
Yep.
That's
Pointing
pointing out
out
towards Mount Washington.
East would point to you. If it were true
Okay,
east.
Mount Washington, if you're talking about Mount Washington, let me get between Camp Lawrence, let me get off Camp Lawrence, looking right up there. If Camp Lawrence is to the north, I mean, if Mount Washington is to the north,
You're pointing northwest, not
I'm
northeast.
pointing, well, according to that, yeah. But if the view from off the dock at Camp Lawrence to Mount Washington, which is,
Okay, now rotate your pencil
Yep.
to the right. No, just keep rotating to the right. Keep
Okay.
rotating, keep going, keep going, keep going, and that's off, that'd be heading up towards Chicora, toward the Mount Washington Valley.
No, you don't have a bigger map there.
okay, yeah, I mean,
It takes a little getting used to.
Yeah,
because
it
it's
does,
not-
it
It's not
does.
the way you intuitively think about it. But we had to position these maps in such a way as to be able to, if we kept it true north, this would be angled, and this would be the size of your map. So we can fit a bigger image by rotating the positioning of the town. So that's what this ties back to. You've seen the text where it talks about watersheds as a framework, and this is the big picture. Now, there are different classifications of watersheds in terms of size. This is the big picture. We could put more layers on this to show more detail of drainage basins, but it starts to take away from the purpose of the map. This is basically to show these big 3 or 4 basins that we are part of, and all the corresponding communities that have some piece in that.
So is that the intent to show what communities we need to work with?
Yeah, and basically, as it relates to shared resources for the big lake, absolutely. And that we should be talking to New Hampton about these pieces where we're draining into New Hampton in these 2 different directions. We're draining into Samberton. This is something called Salmon Brook. This is a major stream system running through the heart of Samberton. So this is very much headwater stuff, but we are influencing New Hampton. We'd be influencing Samberton. And what this illustrates to me is that this is very much a shared resource that has had zero planning done by the constituent communities, the Winnisquam watershed. So we're not probably the biggest player in that. Belmont, Laconia might be bigger, but we should be part of that because we have all of this headwater drainage that affects the lake as well as this shorefront.
We don't have graphically showing what areas
Have plans.
plans. I mean, we have the list.
In the plan itself, it talks about some of the planning since 2002 recommended that framework. There's been some work done on this part of Winnipesaukee that involves Saunders Bay, Paugus Bay, and Meredith Bay. So there's some work that's been done right in here. There's some ongoing work right now in Marlborough, over in here.
Center Harbor Bay.
Center Harbor Bay. The Center Harbor Bay project stalled, but the Molten Borough project is moving forward in terms of trying to, look at over in this area. And there was some work, some river watershed done on the lower Pemmy that incorporated a little bit of our town up in here. But here again, we're upper headwater, so we don't have a whole hell of a lot to do with that. And then the one that's got most of the attention in the past and is currently being amended is the Waukee watershed. And that would be a subset of the Winnipesaukee piece, which is this one.
Which is Ashland, Holderness,
And so
Center
that's
Harbor, New
Meredith,
Hampton,
Center Harbor,
Meredith.
New Hampton, Holderness, and Ashland, going all the way up into here. So that's why that was a priority back in 2002, is because it involved 5 towns.
But that's where we made some progress,
Made
though,
huge
in
progress.
spite of the
Yep.
complications.
And so, as it's indicated in the draft work, the Waukee Watershed Advisory Committee is working with the Lake Winnipesaukee Watershed Association on updating those plans and getting more into the business of quantifying nutrient inputs to have a better feel for how to manage some of that. So that's work that's ongoing. It's all alluded to in the text of natural resources. So there's a lot of work that's ongoing here, some work that's been done here, and a little bit of work that's been done up here. So it sort of leaves almost by default the significance of the Winnisquam watershed.
There hasn't been something on Pongus, is Pongus Bay part of Winnipesaukee? Is that
Yes.
further
Yeah,
over?
that's one of the
okay.
bays.
Guilford, Saunders Bay, Paugus Bay, and Meredith Bay, these 3 towns collaborated.
What's that one called?
The one that has
The bigger
Mosquito
one?
Bridge?
This one here,
No, the bigger one, the one you said that hasn't.
this one, that's Paugus Bay.
Winnisquam.
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 Winnisquam. Yep.
Trying to remember where that.
So Mosquito Bridge, that'd be right here.
Yeah.
And then this is, I believe, Silver Lake in Belmont. if I'm
On
not
the
mistaken.
left, when you're going
Yeah,
to
so,
Tilton?
John, not to beat a dead horse, but if we present this to people with that orientation, they're going to be very confused. I mean, we've been talking about it now for 10 minutes, and we're still trying to
It's
orientate
possible when you're
ourselves.
talking to other people that are used to maybe looking at their towns north to south.
We may,
Talking about the towns.
there might be a section where we could kind of show, here's one orientation,
Yeah.
here's the other.
Yeah, I
You know,
just,
something like that. So it
was
would
my thinking,
I don't, my guess would be a lot of people aren't used to seeing too many maps of Meredith other than a street map.
Oh, every pictorial, every lake shot, anybody that has anything to do with the lake, it's orientated.
Anyone who sees who has like lake maps, anyone's a
Yeah.
boater.
Any lake map.
Right.
And if you look at the
You know?
state maps, you always, I always try and find Meredith in it, you know?
Sure.
It's like, it's very big, so you gotta look sometimes. Winnipesaukee and then find it.
You know,
Right.
I mean, I'm talking maybe 45 degrees, maybe.
Wraps around
you know,
Laconia. That's what I always.
Something probably more like
True
that
north.
is what you see represented most often.
Right.
And you got 93, which cuts us off a
If
little
you-
bit. You know, it's,
93
Yes,
cuts
most
that
people
top
used
left
to see
corner
this lake
where
more like
Spectacle
that.
Pond
That's
is.
right.
yeah.
So just so, not to beat the dead horse, so let's say the lake was rotated this way. We all know if that you're heading down to Alton Bay, if we're orientated this way, which way are we heading?
So,
Southeast. That's what this would suggest. But I hear what you're saying, in terms of people's comfort, we can certainly look
Yeah.
at
No,
that.
I'm gonna go run home, break into my boat, and get my plate shot up.
This was a later map, when we talk about a couple of the other things, like this map, for example. This is where, to get to a certain scale size that we're comfortable with, to be able to actually see the map, that's why it was elongated this way.
Mhm.
So you can fit it on a standard, was it 25 by 36 sheet or something like that.
Mhm.
And if we rotated it true north, it's going to be that big to plot on a typical plotter.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you're at a real small map. So we gain readability in terms of looking at the micro side of things.
Mhm.
And that decision was made long before this map is brand new.
Yeah, well,
So at this point.
See, I would again challenge the compass rose there too.
Of course you would, because they're all the same.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course you would, I mean.
Okay, oh,
That's good, consistent. Okay, it's good to be consistent.
all right.
So also alluded to in the 2000 plan was the value of conducting a natural resource inventory, which was done. It was done in '05 and then updated in '09 or expanded upon. One of the big benefits of the, and it's alluded to in the text, one of the aspects of the natural resource inventory, the wetland scientists did aerial photo interpretation of the town to redefine our wetland base coverage. There are multiple sources of information to get wetland information, and when we started looking at them against each other, soils information, NWI maps, the old stuff that the town had in the 80s, nothing reconciled, they weren't even close. So we made a conscious decision to create a new base layer, and this ties to so many things. I mean, you've seen this because of the updating to our wetland ordinance. So you know, planning board has seen this before, but that's where it came from the natural resource inventory. So what we've added to this map, well, this was essentially some wetland stuff. This gets a little more difficult to read. This is a composite of sorts. And we can, if you guys think of something, oh, well, if we could have this feature and this feature and that feature, we can make adjustments. So we can't do this a bazillion times because we all got to move forward in the next couple chapters, but we can certainly make edits and change things. So first off is topography, 20-foot contours, USGS topo. And so these are, we have about 9 summits in the community. Those are just ticked off for reference purposes. This is the Chemung Range, Oak Hill, Gilman Hill, where we have the tower, Pinnacle Hill, which is a major feature in the Meredith Bay landscape, and Millstone Hill, a portion of which is over there by the Page Pond property.
That one's all tough to see from back here.
So, starting with that topo, what the red lines are is the watershed information, but now at a micro scale, right? So if you think of this as the macro scale of where the water goes, when we get down to the brook level, so now we're not talking river basins, but we're talking your backyard kind of thing. So this is, the red lines here are sub-watersheds and catchments, just much tighter detail in terms of where the water goes. That's what the red lines are. So these are, and you'll see.
We're just looking at some maps.
Hi. So if you see
Come sit down.
on the topo, you can see that the height of land essentially and ridges kind of form the overall framework for the watershed delineation. So in your planning board review work, one of Angela's things is what watershed are we in? So that's a standard part of the staff review is if you're looking at a project somewhere, where's the water go? Okay. So you got topography. We could add, we do have steep slopes, greater than 25%. We chose not to add them to this particular composite because it makes it really, really hard to read. But you can see areas where these lines get really close. Those are your very steep slopes. You can pick them off the map pretty readily without having to blotch them all out and create difficulty to read. So we added all of our streams. I think we have about a dozen designated large streams. These are all perennials, most first or second water. Bartlett Brook, Page, Hawkins, Hatch, Dolph, Blake, Mill Brook, and Stony Brook. So those brooks are on there. The darker colors, the 2 different shades of greens are the wetlands from the NRI carried over in this map. So they're just carried over. So, and then the last feature that we've added, because of the emphasis on water as well, we didn't want to forget groundwater. So we talked about the importance of groundwater. The majority of our land area, if we think of our water system being in this area, the majority of our land area is served by aquifers. And so we brought in the stratified drift aquifers, which are the sand and gravel larger yield aquifers. If it's not one of these, then your wellhead is going into bedrock. The reason why we make that connection is because the folks that live and breathe this science are finding more and more naturally occurring contaminants in drinking water. Radon, fluoride, arsenic. These are all naturally occurring things that are associated with the wearing of bedrock, with the breaking down of bedrock. And so I think the recommendation from our point of view will be to encourage more awareness, more education, more homeowner testing of their own waters to make sure that they're comfortable with the water that they're drinking. So this sort of illustrates that the majority of that area in town is served by bedrock wells. So that's what we have on this composite. Now the last piece, another feature of the natural resource inventory. So a natural resource inventory is what it sounds like. It's an inventory of natural resources. But one of the outgrowths of that, one of the byproducts of that, was where do a whole bunch of things occur in the same place? A lot of resource concentration in areas. And in that inventory they call those co-occurrence areas, where there's a lot of co-occurring features. And where there's a lot of co-occurring features, it suggests that these are probably some of the areas that we should be focusing on from a conservation point of view. Whether it's a sensitivity that developers and the planning board has relative to what kind of conditions might exist on the property, or whether it's to help guide the Conservation Commission or others in terms of anyone's choice to conserve their land. And so these darker outlines.
So some of the natural features would be like sensitive habitat or rare and endangered species.
Exemplary natural communities, all kinds of different things. Many of these co-occurring high-valued areas tie back into these prime wetland complexes. So you see there's an awful lot of wetland in these areas, with the exception of that one. This one up here is the Comeau ridgeline, and when you get up over 1,000 feet in elevation, there's some very unique tree growth up in here, up 1,500 feet. So this whole ridge line in here is kind of a whole different higher alpine kind of ecology than you would have in other parts of town. So there's definitely some unique things that are occurring up along that ridge line. So that's what's called co-occurrence areas, and it's really the results of a lot of that natural resource inventory work that occurred in 2005 and 2009. So what we do with the computer, we carry these outlines, and so we can look at anything through the lens of co-occurrence to see what's going on in these areas. So in this example, if we're looking at wetlands only, we still have your co-occurrence area, so you can see how much of that co-occurrent area is wetland. This map here looks at co-occurrence areas from the perspective of conserved lands. So these are the same co-occurrence areas, but if you were saying, okay, if we're trying to prioritize, a future project someday, what might be areas that we'd want to focus on. So this is meant to kind of put it in the context of what's already conserved. And we're toying with the idea of doing an additional kind of analysis of these areas, and net out wetlands, net out slopes, steep slopes, net out conserved, look at the vacant area that is left to develop, and go from there. So anyway, these are just a couple maps that we have done that are referenced back in the draft text. This is an older one. So anyway, that was just to kill some time while we're waiting for Ann. Why don't we jump back in and get started.
So I trust everyone's had a chance to at least do a review of chapters that have been drafted. I actually received comments from Liz. I received comments from Bill, and Ann sent me some stuff today. So given that, I'm glad you guys have read some of it. So we've reviewed the introduction. There's a couple of places that I just wanted to talk about. I guess the text, and one of which being in the values and vision, so we're gonna get into the goal of a few of the chapters and then what the objectives are and what we've carried over and maybe some that we've added. But before I do that, on page 12, there is a paragraph in the old plan that's carried over. And whether or not we want to keep it is probably something that we need to discuss and something that we have to make a decision tonight. But it talks about comprehensive transportation management. Talks about recognizing the importance of all modes of transportation, negative impacts associated with seasonal traffic, congestion, and both negative and positive aspects of high traffic
It's
volumes.
specific to 25 and 3, though.
Yeah, I think so. It doesn't say 25 and 3. The convenience and safety of pedestrians will be given a high priority, and a system of bike lanes and trails would offer greater opportunity for local travel throughout the town. People of all ages and abilities easily and safely can enjoy walking to and from their chosen activity or as a mode of transportation. So,
I don't think, I mean, some of that can be
a
rewritten a little bit.
comprehensive transportation management plan will be successfully developed and implemented. I think that this was geared at 3 and 25. It doesn't say 3 and 25.
I still, and I don't know the feeling in community, I think we need to get, in my own opinion, I'm going to talk about 3 and 25 for a moment, we need to get more people involved, get the fire chief obviously involved, but I still think the light solution, and that could actually benefit the fire department having lights, because they just make them all, red or whatever color they need to zip through town better. But
The reason why we wanted to flag it, I think the selectmen have it as a workshop item. There's the first meeting, I think, after the public hearing.
It's tomorrow.
Yep. So this is something that we need to come back to make sure that we benefit from all of that process.
Right,
And then...
I mean,
and then
comprehensive might be something we want to downplay because, I mean, that
Well, by the
originally this
time
was
this
going to be
goes to
from...
get published and something's already decided, then to whatever extent, has been
It
decided,
may
may
not.
or may not impact this.
So,
Well, it
Yeah,
seems,
well, we can wait, see what happens.
I just wanted to let you know.
it seems to me, and I shouldn't have interrupted you, that as we're creating a revision of the plan, there are some things that are gonna be fixed, and 3 and 25 is one of them. I mean, we can't, well, this plan was written before, we didn't have the issues with 3 and 25 that we do today. And there isn't really any solution to it that's gonna make enough people happy, so the town isn't gonna be in an uproar, obviously. So, do we even wanna say create a comprehensive plan?
well, that's essentially what
Can I
it's
invite
flagged.
the public for
That's what-
something here? You talked to a lot of people. Did you discuss the traffic light solution?
No, no,
Oh.
I didn't, because that wasn't
It wasn't the
out in front.
proposal, right, yeah.
No, it wasn't out in front.
And so at this point, we're just flagging that we need to come back and make sure that wherever we find ourselves
Yep.
5 or 6 months from now, that before we go public with a draft, that we should revisit that and make sure it reflects what you want.
We're gonna have a new board of selectmen coming in. That will, they obviously tend to drive it a bit. They're elected officials. They certainly, reacted
Well, the
pretty
problem's not
strongly
going
to
to go
that.
away. The problem's not going to go away, so I think it still
Right.
needs to be.
The issue's out there, but we don't want to suggest that this planning process is trying to ram any kind of solution at anybody, rather than trying to benefit from the feedback we're getting and whatever direction it's recharted.
Or possibly reflect on whatever
Yeah, I think
happens.
flagging it is good, because that way we know that we have to look at that again
So that's
before
why
we-
it is the way it is, so we
Yeah.
don't.
So we're not trying to wordsmith it tonight, other than we want to put that out there, that we'll need to come back to that later
That's
on.
transportation.
I mean,
Oh, it's second to last, so hopefully by May, June, we'll know,
Well, and I
we'll know
think Bill's right,
more.
it needs to be cleaned up a little bit. The verbiage,
What?
that paragraph.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, whatever we do, yeah, we'll change the verbiage.
All right. so, I made a comment, so now on to chapter 4, community. There was a comment from Liz, and I think I might agree with her, to potentially put local organizations and networks into an appendix.
I agree with that.
Okay, and so maybe just to reflect the
More
depth
summary fashion. in
of
the
organizations,
report.
maybe refer to them in numbers. Okay.
Do we have any other big lists that should be in the appendix?
I kind of question the homeowners associations. I mean, it's not something you can join unless you're
Part of a homeowner.
part of, that
Yeah,
could be, you know.
but it's a network of people, and we use them to get information to them,
And
especially like Lake.
in some cases, they are
Joyce.
stewards of natural resources, community beaches, infrastructure.
Common
Other
area.
than-
And it's an element of volunteerism in their own way, so.
Yeah.
Even though it's not a public organization, you know, there is an extensive number of homeowners associations that depend upon volunteerism that, you know, that ties in with broader goals that we have in terms of stewardship.
I mean, the same to, maybe to a lesser degree can be said about some of these other organizations. I mean,
The
yeah,
purpose-
religious organizations tend to focus on their
the-
congregation.
The point of it, and we can still capture that with the summary, I think that's a good point, is that there are lots of networks and lots of topical areas that if people are inclined to want to volunteer, there's tons of opportunity. In fact, the community benefits extensively from volunteerism. And this is just one way of trying to represent that that's part of our community life. There's probably not too many people that you wouldn't talk to that aren't volunteering somewhere, somehow, to either help their homeowners association, their church, their governance, whatever the case may be. And that's a wonderful thing. We're blessed to have that. And so this was meant just to say this is part of, and that's not to say everybody's got to do it, but we certainly benefit from that. So we can certainly summarize that and then kick the more detailed list into an appendix.
Okay, so did anybody want to say anything about that chapter, or should I just jump to the goal?
Do you have my comments? I don't have my file.
Our printer was on the fritz, so I did not get to print out yours. I sent yours and Ann's to the printer, but they did not come through, because we had a guy working on it all day, or most of the day. Okay, but I have your comments, they won't go.
Okay. Because some of my comments were just that, comments,
Mhm.
as you noticed. I mean, you know,
Yep.
question this, rewrite that,
Yeah,
things like that. And then,
somewhere editorial.
yeah,
Okay. So those won't, I definitely will not lose sight of those, or yours.
yeah, and they're just opinion. They're not necessarily have to go.
Yeah,
over
but
the
yeah,
end.
something to think
And
about.
they're just something to think about, yeah.
Okay, so this goal was pretty much carried over from the goal of the master plan, although we divided up the previous chapter was people and community, and we thought, well, probably community and people or population deserve separate chapters. So now they're separated out, as is the goals and objectives. So, so this goal actually was entirely new. In order to achieve our vision for the future, continue to support community life through building relationships, encouraging civic participation, and supporting public education. Meredith's ability to maintain a safe environment and active community allows Meredith to grow in a way that people feel connected as Meredith evolves with time. And given what the chapter says, that's probably right in line with the goal. So objective A, continue to acknowledge people as a resource and promote their development towards successful community development. Do you guys want to just take the time to read?
Well, we're not going to go through every one of these.
Yeah.
I forgot.
I
Okay,
have
you
read
forgot
it.
your plan. Did you read it all?
I read it.
I
I
did.
just didn't print it out.
I didn't comment.
Okay.
I thought the goal was pretty wordy, and I was wondering if it
Okay.
could be more concise.
I could definitely make it more concise. Yep,
And simpler.
yep.
I mean, you put it more in layman's terms, if you want to call it.
Okay. The next objective was improve opportunities for all residents, businesses, and organizations to connect with their community. And the last objective in that chapter is maintain and improve the health and well-being of our residents and visitors. So, that
Was that the health paragraph in that section?
there was, and the importance of, outdoor recreation opportunity and biking and walking facilities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I also see that too, is tying into water quality and
Transportation.
transportation
Yeah.
and everything else, because all that stuff.
That's a good point, Ann, and one thing you mentioned this at the outset, one thing we need to be mindful about is that there are so many of these interrelationships that are critical. So when we find one, write one down that if you think it's something that we need to reinforce in another chapter. In other words, we may get to the transportation chapter and want to work back this way.
Right.
See what I'm saying? So until we get through all of these chapters and are thinking about these interrelationships, we want to be able to have that flexibility of coming back and say, oh, we really should strengthen some language here. Or, so those threads are really, really important for us to be mindful of, identify in some cases. And so as we work through all these chapters, that's a really important point. And so this might be an area where we talk about public health, but somewhere else where we're talking about recreational opportunities in some of our conservation lands dovetails with that. They complement each other. And so those complementary strategies are important. Real important. So in the last section, the way these are formatted is how does this section relate to something else in the plan? And that's where there's an opportunity to provide.
Is there any way to
You listed the
do,
players
not in the plan itself, but maybe as an addendum or appendix or whatever, a matrix for all these interrelationships?
Potentially.
I think that a visual might be good for a lot of people.
We play with that idea. Another could just
Okay, so they're in.
think of a web of all the things.
Exactly.
Maybe not every recommendation, but
Not to
just
beat
all
another-
the
not to beat
interrelationships.
another dead horse.
Physical health versus public health versus,
Carl gave us,
staying healthy. I mean, it's all health related. It goes to the hiking, water quality, food quality, and locally grown.
Singular.
Yeah, there might be a couple of, from what you're saying, I mean, it strikes me you could almost have a couple of topics and show how they interrelate.
Some kind of graphic, yeah.
I mean, not just one thing, you could have like,
Right, I
three
mean,
main themes or something that have.
Are you talking about how we could graphically show connection of,
Yeah, if you could graph the chapters or matrix the chapters.
so Ed
and how
gave
they
me a point
interrelate.
to add to the public health with different players, and to add Lakes Region Visiting Nurse Association. So that's one that I just got at it.
I don't remember in there,
Right,
but
the contaminated wells goes to.
So you go start with natural resources, you end up in public health, and if our water quality craps out, so does the economy.
You can do that in your spare time, right?
Yeah, but, so, it's a good point, Ann, and let us think about how we could do that. I'm not sure we could take all 300 recommendations and weave them into something legible, but we certainly could create something that's going to illustrate the interrelatedness of a lot
Well,
of
if we
things.
did an overview, then somebody could say, oh, well, I might find that in this chapter, or that chapter.
or like I said, I think you could almost take a theme, a few themes, that sort of fall out of this, and then show their interconnection. I don't know, whether it could be like,
Like your overlay
natural,
maps, you know?
Yeah,
healthy living or something like that, and they could show how different things go together, and then education, and show how,
Well, that's good, yeah.
little things like that that you could sort of piece together. how they-
We are a healthy community.
We are.
We are a healthy community.
so,
Different pieces coming into it.
so why don't we all think about that one in terms of, ways we might be able to do it. We'll put some time into it and think it through, and certainly by the time, when we get towards the end of the review of 6 or 7 drafts, then hopefully those threads even become more apparent than they are tonight for us.
I don't think I think it'll create itself if it'll work. I really do.
What you're saying.
We've got it tweaked.
It's a good point, because that is really an underlying theme in this whole thing is the interrelatedness of things. Because one of the sort of the cardinal sins of past plans is, in planners' world, they call it the silo approach, where here's transportation, it's in its own buttoned-up little silo, and here's economic development, and here's housing. But realistically, all of these things have some level of interrelatedness. They're not exclusive of each other. They're interrelated. And so a lot of, generally speaking, a lot of older plans never identified those interrelatedness characteristics.
I also think from a political standpoint, if you've got an organization or a group that has a special interest, it would help diffuse a potential strong argument or problem. And say, look, yes, we understand how this segment applies to you, but look how it relates to everybody else.
And the flip side of that is important, that if I use Page Pond as an example, so that started out as a conservation project, but in the end of it, before it was all said and done, you had the business community doing fundraisers to help the project because they understood that those kinds of conservation features form the context within which their businesses operate. And being part of that kind of community and have those kinds of opportunities.
And now it's got recreation involved.
That's right,
and
that's right. So there's
education.
a good example of that. And maybe that might be sort of to your point, Bill, like whether it's a thematic thing or in that case a project, look at all the pieces that came into to make that happen and illustrate the interrelatedness
That's good,
of
yeah.
education, conservation, economic development, and recreation, and transportation, walkability and all those kinds of objectives,
Yeah.
all in at a project scale.
Yeah, that's good, because, I mean, you could name 100 things, you don't want to have 100 charts, but a couple of interesting ones,
Yep.
the Page Pond like that, would show interrelationships.
Like a few examples of in a relationship without
and
like
also-
writing out every single relationship, but just
Right.
getting people
Yeah.
to recognize.
And some things sort of, as you work on these things, some things sort of come to the
Yeah.
surface.
Yeah, like water quality always does, time and
Yeah,
time again.
I think the population to some extent is really
Yeah.
becoming significant.
Well, speaking of population, that's the next chapter. And since this chapter, or since this first chart, resident population trends and projections, page 21, the projected population for 2020 and 2030 were revised or updated based on, I guess, in-migration.
Well, they're published by the Office of State Planning,
Okay.
and we were working with.
Well, we're
Since
working with
this-
what was published back
Oh,
in
okay.
2000,
By the
so
Planning
now we have
Commission.
2010.
Oh, good,
So
okay.
population did not increase as quickly, so their projections are less.
A
right?
slow group.
You know,
And so you'll find that the line flattens out a little bit.
Compared to that, when you go back to 2002,
It, it went up more, and so this is a little bit flatter.
well, I think it flattened out because the economy was so bad.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that
But we didn't know-
cycle
but in
is on the
2002, you
upswing
didn't know
now,
that.
so,
Yeah.
they're giving our, their
well,
numbers based on this, and we're
all
gonna be here.
forecasts, as far as I do forecasting.
Yeah, you economists do that all the
I
time.
mean, yeah, it depends on where you're in the cycle as to what people tend to forecast.
Yes, exactly. And if
You're like,
they're
in the
forecasting down
course of
here,
3 years, you get
they're
a
planning
forecast.
up here,
Just about, yeah.
we should be planning from the last peak and projecting from that instead of planning from the most
Yeah, you
recent
get,
valley.
it's difficult.
It is.
And I mean, everybody
Well, the
looks
big
to-
difference-
And they always look at the next year to see whether your forecast was right. Your 30-year forecast that
But
isn't
one
right
of
in
the
the
big
first year. you
differences,
get-
one of the big differences with this last cycle was the absence of any real recovery. Compared to all, the other post-World War II economic cycles, you saw much more robust recovery. And so even though things have hemorrhaging stopped and things are getting better, I still think it's still forecast to be a moderate at best recovery, isn't it, Bill? It's not like.
Well, I
We're gonna
tell
go-
people we're in a mild depression. I think I give some credit, at least for their initial reaction. The Federal Reserve did help prevent this from becoming a serious depression. I'm not sure their QE 4 or 5 or whatever they're on now is necessarily helpful, but and depressions have a whole lot different characteristic than a recession does. A fairly good example was what we went through in the late 80s and 90s for the
So one of the, to Ann's point, one of the things that, the rates of growth, they vary. If you look at our historical rates, you know, some decades it's been 20-some-odd%, some it's been 4%. You know, is it fair to average any of that? You know, it's hard to say. In fact, half decades, you know, in some of these economic cycles, all the growth occurred in a half a decade, because the rest of the decade was a slide. So, you know, it is sort of high altitude, long range. The bigger message, I think, in the demographic section is really looking at age distribution, because that is much more predictable. We're not going to have the kind of in-migration that we've had in years past. And when you look at the age distribution based upon, you know, reasonably reliable data, it is what it is. And so we need to dissect that and sort of understand some of those implications moving forward. Not to get wrapped around the pole over it, but definitely, you know,
But that's a significant,
there are takeaways there.
that's
Takeaways
the
to
significance
healthcare.
of all the demographic information as far as I'm concerned.
You know, whether we're, you know,
Is the baby
6,800 or
boomers marching on?
6,400 people probably isn't going to affect any of our policies. But when we look at the age distribution in terms of its effect on healthcare, transportation, housing alternatives, you know, all these kinds of things, you know, there are bigger workforce availability. There are much bigger considerations based upon the internal workings of age distribution, more so than what the gross numbers are.
Decline in school age.
And even that, to your point about, you know, that looking at that big picture, if Mark was here in the room, you know, the schools had, you know, flat, if not slightly declining enrollment for a while. And I think was it the kindergarten class?
Kindergarten.
The last registration was, you know, hugely larger than what they anticipated. Now that might
Well,
be.
not until, there was a lot of kids in Sandwich that registered. It was like a big,
Yeah.
big sandwich
Unforeseen
boom of
bubble
kids.
showed up. Now, is that
But
a
when you're
bubble?
talking about the sandwich school having so few kids, an increase in 10, sometimes we're like,
One, let's
You don't
say
know
Double
until
the
it's
size, yeah.
burst.
leap.
Right, well, if it happens year after year, you know, flags are going on. Is it an anomaly in 1 year and that
Yes.
bubble works its grade, and which happens
Right.
quite often?
Yeah.
Or is it the beginning of a trend? And the only real recommendation there is that you just pay attention. You try to be as ahead of the curve as you can a little bit by paying attention to revised estimates.
Yeah,
That's
and we
what
do
I
have, it isn't quite as easy as it seems, because they do tend to get, I would say we're a net importer in the early grades, but in-migration to some extent. So you might track, you know, they do track a little bit of what's coming up, because they have the testing they do it for 3- and 4-year-olds, I think, just to see whether they're gonna need some special needs or something like that. So they have a little idea what's coming up, but then they'll frequently get a few extra kids, and that, you know, may have happened with this kindergarten.
Well, the other sort of characteristic of just a small district is it doesn't take much to put a wrench in the program. You know, if you're talking 2,000 kids and 50 more show up, you know, you figure it out. If your class size is only 80, you know, and 20 more show up, you know, it's you know. So that's essentially what your class sizes are, is about 80 kids per grade, more or less, ballpark. That's not big.
No, I think it was around 100 when my kids graduated.
It's 42.
there's not 80 kids. in kindergarten.
Oh, you want to go there? So I think,
67
but that,
first grade.
if it's not in there should be recommendations that we pay attention to those economic indicators, particularly the demographic indicators, to discern, you know, changes in any of the forecasting. And it's hard because you're in the midst of something, you're trying to step back and see, is this a blip or the beginning of a trend? We do the same thing with water quality. You know, you look at a water quality hunk of data for a given summer, and it could be great or it could be crappy. But you got to put that in the context of where it fits to get a better sense as to its relevance. The shorter that window, the less reliable the trend value would be. And it's really the trend value that we're interested in, is looking at the trends, things like that.
And so that's why the age distribution table, showing the trend from 1980, 90, 2000 to 2010.
So you can see the shift. You can see the aging of the population right in our own distribution charts. And that's not projections. I mean, you can do
those
your
are
own
facts.
projection. Those are just the facts in terms of census data. So you see the younger workforce and the childbearing age numbers going down. You see the aging of the population, and you see the increase in the elderly. I mean, those jump right off the charts at you.
So what would Mark emphasize? Healthcare, education? What's his third?
Well, I can see in
Energy.
this area that the workforce becoming younger and being in healthcare because the needs of the elderly, that's what they're gonna be. In that planning and zoning conference they had up in the North Country last year, they talked about that. How are we gonna educate enough people so people can age in place because there aren't gonna be enough facilities for them to live in?
Well, of course, you gotta have affordable housing in Meredith. You're going to be able to retain those people that are
Families.
working on a
Yeah.
service
Yeah,
salary.
yeah.
But is that housing gonna be in Meredith, or is that housing gonna be in New Hampton?
Or both.
That's what the Japanese want to do.
You think so?
That's what they're planning.
No, we
I was just pointing out, the Japanese are planning on using robotics to do it.
Yeah, I'd really like somebody helping with my
Yeah, I saw that.
therapy.
I saw that.
Well, one of the interesting trends on the housing side is that as people scale back and they want to sell their 4-bedroom home, the younger generations that are coming up don't have the same kind of perspective and values that maybe some of us have had in terms of the value of investing in a home. They're more mobile. They've also lived through all these crazy recessions, saying, why do I want to do that? And so the 20-somethings that are in the workforce now don't have the same kind of interest in taking out a 30-year mortgage is a long time.
Or income in a lot of cases.
And
Yeah.
A
so,
lot of people are renting.
so
Who
the
could
perspective,
definitely afford to buy a
the
house.
perspective on home ownership is different.
So you're suggesting that perhaps there's gonna be an influx of renters in the very properties that exist?
Well,
Or-
it
or
could be
need
that,
for
it could be conversions.
Downsizing your home.
And the newer construction, for example, may not be, I mean, the waterfront's gonna be the waterfront. I mean, it's gonna have its allure anyway, no matter what happens demographically, because they don't make more waterfront. But once you get off the waterfront, you're probably not gonna see as much developmental pressure in the long run for large 3-4-bedroom homes. You might see different kinds of housing styles where people might want a single-level, two-bedroom cottagey kind of houses, something to scale. If you wanted to scale back in Meredith, if you had the
Less
$500,000 house, or $400,000 house, and you're at a point in life where you want to scale back, what do?
People
You probably go to one
want to
town.
live in smaller spaces.
One of the things I suggested is that this is not something we can sit down and draw on a map right away, I think, but think about a 1-acre zoning. I don't know whether we have much of that in this town.
Residential district
But that's what, 10,000 square feet?
with utilities.
1 acre?
You have a 40,000 square foot density if you don't have,
Oh, you do it this
One
way?
acre.
Okay.
We have 1
But
acre
that's-
zoning if you don't
but
have
that's gonna
water
be
and
so,
sewer.
but then it's subject to soils-based lot sizing, which would.
Right.
If you have water and sewer, it's 10,000 square foot.
So it's about an acre if
Right
you
here.
don't, okay.
Minimum.
But just in the residential area, right? Because, I mean, I look where I live, and I don't know whether you really need, there could be more pockets of 1-acre zoning, even if it is a little bit rural out there.
Well,
I mean, Chemung is Chemung. I mean, I don't think,
Part
I'm not
of-
gonna suggest 1 acre is
part
out
of-
there.
Part of the
But-
challenge though, and I think when we get into the land use stuff and those kinds of things, and we look at that web between housing and land use, certainly this should come back up on the table. But keep in mind that when we do soils-based lot sizing, that's to protect groundwater. That's to protect the drinking water that we were talking about earlier. And so because of our soils and slopes, because we have rocky, shallow, bedrocky soil with moderate slopes in most places, once you get out of the village,
Yeah.
those, based upon these science-based models, suggest that you need, 2-3 acres a lot.
Yeah, leave that much.
So
Okay.
even in some areas where we have higher density, because they're septic-related, septic and well systems, they're subject to environmental standards, which, so you could find yourself in a 1-acre district, and because the soils-based lot sizing typically look at 2-3 acres. Now, Crestwood's a good example of it working the other way, because they were able to go cluster. You have 1-acre lots in there, but they had some pretty decent soils to work with as well. So it's very often the carrying capacity of the land that in many cases ultimately drives what we can do when we're in the 1 or 3 acre districts. 10 acres, different ballgame in Comeau, different ballgame
Yeah.
when you have utilities.
Yeah, I don't know, it's part of what is good and bad about New England. I mean, we have these restrictive zoning to some extent. I mean, it does keep your house prices up, but that in turn makes it difficult for young people to move in.
On the other hand, it promotes the quality of life that we've all.
Yeah, to
There's
some
a balance.
extent.
There's got to be a balance.
Yeah, it needs to be, and, I mean, neighborhoods are nice. I think, you don't have as much of a neighborhood when you have 3 acres.
Oh, I agree. But like,
Well, one of the-
water quality is probably primary.
Yeah, well,
to
no,
everything.
that's, no,
One
I
of the
understand what you're
keys for us,
saying.
one of the keys for us, and we can certainly revisit the balancing act, but we go from 1/4 acre density in the heart of the downtown to places where we have 20,000, 40,000 square feet, essentially 1 acre, a little under 1 acre, to 3 acre, to 10 acre. We have accessory apartments, we have duplexes, we have multifamily, we have single family. So we provide for a range of housing types, and we provide for that range of density. So in the scheme of things, what works against us for affordable housing isn't the zoning. Because there's plenty of places where the density works and they'll make condos instead of apartments. So it's the market demanding condominium ownership as opposed to rentals is what works against us. So we have some things working against us because we are such a nice town, we have such a big influence from the waterfront, that land values are higher. And if you're a developer and you can put a McMansion on the property and make X profit, why are you going to build starter homes? Right? So we're in a desirable place for people to live and retire, and that has sort of a way of working against us because it's just another element of cost that's a little bit higher. You could go 2 towns off the big lake, the same acre is going to be considerably less than what it would be in Meredith just because of where we are. So we have a few things like that compound the affordable housing issue, coupled with our service economy. We're very much a service economy on the one hand, so you have lower wages and you have higher land values. And those work against folks that are trying to eke out the service job living.
It's tough for them to live in
But
town.
it's not as much a function, and it's not to say that we can't and shouldn't look at adjustments to the zoning where it's warranted. But those would be tweaks as opposed to any wholesale miracles that we're going to find in the zoning framework.
I wonder if the real estate people.
I mean,
give us
that's
some-
the answer I wanted to hear. I mean, it was really raising the issue, not saying we need it or we have to have it.
So, I wonder if some of our real estate folks, and we certainly have plenty of them around, could give us some indication of what prospective buyers are looking for when they come up here now. Are they looking for the McMansion?
Or what can people not find to buy?
Right.
I
I don't think they're
Not
looking for the
necessarily
McMansion
what people
anymore,
are
for example.
buying or what maybe they can't find to buy. Because I think some people may be looking for one thing, but end up having to settle for something else or settle somewhere else.
That's a good point. I was talking to Becky Witcher, my tenants in the gray house this winter, moved from Atlanta, and they were trying to find a house to buy, 2 of them and a dog. And they couldn't find what they were looking for, and they roamed from Ossipee, down to Gilmanton.
Yeah.
And, they
Well,
had so many,
it's-
and then she had another family, they wanted 2 first-floor masters for them as they age and for their parents now. And that houses, they can't find what people want.
Yeah.
I don't think we're gonna be able to accommodate because the market changes every 10 to 15 years.
Well, we have a lot of houses, old housing.
Hey, and we have the old houses. I mean, the house I live in, you couldn't even get a wheelchair through the door.
Or negotiate the steep steps or whatever.
They're not really steps, it's a ladder. It may have a riser and a tread, but it's a ladder.
But to some extent, our old housing is our affordable housing too. I mean, maybe not good
Right,
for
but
the
it's
elderly,
just
but
right,
it's,
it's tougher for,
for certain groups, but I
But
mean, at
not
least
for our
it allows.
demographics.
No, but it's for the young people who want to move into Meredith because we have decent schools.
Yeah.
I mean, it does afford an opportunity for people who are working, maybe not the service economy as easily, but someone who has a halfway decent job can move into Meredith and take advantage of a good school system and, husband and wife working, something okay. They're not gonna be able to afford some of the nicer houses we have, but they may be able to afford our older homes.
The other thing, when you talked about the neighborhood thing, and if you think of the conservation subdivision ordinance that we did, and we really haven't had the resumption of a growth spurt to the point where we've really tested that, but that's an opportunity to build the kind of neighborhood community you're talking about, with the flexibility on lot sizing that comes with that.
And I think, I mean, as much as some people criticize clusters, I think there's a lot of advantages to being able to have, people live together a little bit, and, in places that might be slightly more affordable, and also just allows some building that might not other people actually build.
Yeah, we really lack neighborhoods here.
We have some, but we have some.
Well,
not as-
We have
that's just
some.
the development trends. I mean, the development trends back in the 50s and 60s were a little like track house kind of neighborhood. I think now it's more.
I mean, my daughter would love to find a neighborhood in Meredith, where the kids could go out and play with other kids next door and across the street and so on and so forth. And, I keep telling her that,
In town, that's it.
it's not Meredith, If you're looking for that in Meredith, you're gonna have a long wait, because she's trying to replicate what she had, in a suburb 18 miles outside of the city of Boston, and that's not gonna,
Yeah.
that's a long way from here.
You're right, it's
but-
not gonna happen. We lived in that kind of neighborhood in Virginia.
No, we used to
It
play out in the
just don't exist.
streets.
But we have,
But maybe some, maybe the demand, maybe the interest is there. I don't know. Again,
some
what are the real estate people?
Well, the key
Little
would be
ones.
to make sure, I think on a lot of these fronts, that
But there's not a lot of
the
kids,
zoning isn't
so.
a barrier. That if there is a true demand to develop that type of housing, it should not have, some inadvertent regulatory barrier that would keep someone from doing it. And that's step one on housing. That's all been looked at over the years to make sure that we are permissive when it comes to housing types and styles and not creating unnecessary roadblocks for people. And then you get into the sort of philosophical debate as to whether or not you should incentivize certain things and give people, discounts and bonuses for doing certain things. And that's a huge philosophical debate as to whether Group A should subsidize Group B because you have a certain type of land use that you want to encourage.
That's a sticky wicket. You want to be going to that with your eyes open.
And to flip the coin, you want to look at it from another perspective. There's land that we've subdivided over the last 5, 6, 7 years. Don Jutton's property, for example, up there on
Yep.
Meredith Center, okay, that he's already come before the planning board for an extension of time.
Yeah.
He had a cluster development that we worked real hard on, I
Is that the
remember.
one on Keys Road?
Yeah, but he sold it, so somebody else owns it.
Oh, he has sold it? Okay, but he wasn't able, and we gave him the extension simply because the economy was so bad, it justified a need
He
for,
couldn't make a go of it.
but he couldn't, so.
well, maybe if the economy does bounce back,
That would've been
these developers are gonna have to look at some different type of
And,
housing.
I'm sure the demand is there, but if people are moving into the areas that are used to that.
I mean, you
My
have,
daughter was the same.
you have 2 phases of Crestwood that hasn't even been built out yet.
Yeah.
Oh,
And those are 1-acre lots, nice part of town.
Off
Yeah, so-
of Pease Road, Crestwood off of
Parade
Pease?
Road.
Parade Road, isn't that
Up
across from the
Parade Road.
nursing home?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. And some of those are pretty small homes in there.
A couple
It's a
thousand
range.
square feet. Really small.
The first cul-de-sac on the left, right up to the Public Works garage,
Up to DOT.
DOT.
Yeah, DOT road.
Yeah, I think they're pretty small.
It's all relative.
Huh?
It's all relative.
Relatively speaking.
So where are we at, Angela? We've got about half an hour before we
Right,
turn it
so
over.
now on to population, we talked about that. Did you guys get a chance to read the goal and a couple of the objectives there? The goal would be, there are many factors that influence future population growth, most of which are beyond the immediate control of the community, such as the location and the effects of the baby boom generation, all what we just discussed. Local and regional planning considerations should be taken into account as our local population continues to age. And so we have all those age-related type of, and
And in the earlier
Promoting
draft, we had
diversity.
identified about, maybe 10 or 12 age-related consideration, population, demographic-related things, and they'll get sprinkled back into their respective chapters.
yeah.
I think I just had a little bit of wordsmithing on some of those,
Mhm.
my comments in that section.
Okay.
mostly.
The next chapter is natural resources. This has had a lot of updating. The natural resource chapter in the 2002 plan did not go into as deep a natural resource as this does. Since the 2002 community plan, a natural resource inventory was conducted. So this plan talks about that, and it also talks about invasive species that wasn't really a topic in the previous plan. There's a lot of planning that goes on with respect to water quality.
Some
We
people would
talked
consider
about-
people from New Jersey as invasive species, huh?
Zing.
No,
In there.
I'm in that group.
Just make sure you scrape them off your boat when you take that out of the water.
So
So
there's,
when you get your 30-year chip, are you half invasive? Half native, or never?
You know,
I'm
I
getting
have to
close,
tell
so-
you guys a story. My mother served on planning board back in the 80s. She came home one night, mad at her wedding, and she called me up. I was living in Virginia, California, or someplace, and she says, I don't even know what the fuss was about. And she says, and he's a relative newcomer in town. He's only been here 40 years. True statement. True statement. And I said, Mother, did you just hear what you said? And she was so upset over something that so, I mean, that's, you kind of have to remember that when we're thinking of these things.
Everybody comes from somewhere.
You bet.
so I'm not going to get into it, but there are several objectives and quite lengthy lists of recommendations when it comes to natural resources.
The big push is water quality. It's
Yeah.
water, water, water. Everything, in the end of the day, and I'm not saying this all needs to be regulated, I'm not suggesting that at all, but that's where the map comes from. Whether it's our streams, our lakes, our economy, our recreation, our drinking water supplies, our well water, it's water, water, water. And we've included some discussion of some of the water quality data that's out there. Generally, we're in pretty good shape. Like the real big high elevation picture, water quality is pretty good, but there are some flags. And so we need to be mindful of working on some things where some flags are raised. And
Continuing or
Hawkins Brook is
expanding our
one,
sampling.
groundwater.
Yeah, the more we can do the sampling, the better. I mean, it's
Because
obviously.
that's data.
What happens, I'll give you a real short example, like in Meredith Bay, we through the UNH LLMP program, we monitor 2 deep water sites. Well, when you're out in the deep water, pulling up the water column from deep water, you have a ton of mixing. So you have this blend, so you have the whole bigger picture blended into the bay. If you go into the shallows near some of the tributary outlets and do similar sampling, you get a whole different picture. So you get much higher concentrations of pollutants coming off the land when you're testing near the tributaries, where the tributaries dump in.
Not every tributary.
Not every tributary, but but that's some of the recommendations that the
Enough to make a difference.
scientific community have said to us, that you need to spend a little more time looking at these inputs, because a lot of stuff gets blended in the mixing in the deep water sites, and so you don't see the effect of the polluted runoff as much as if you were testing more near shore.
And you don't know as well where the problems are.
So the good news is that those deep water averaging, that deep water sites are looking pretty good overall. And that's sort of part of the problem, is like if you have a crisis to rally around, people will rally around a crisis. If things are going pretty good, it's hard to get people motivated. And so as an oversimplified statement, we have pretty good water quality in our lakes and ponds. You know, I've been running through all the data for the purposes of this update, and there's no, you know, major flags. There are some isolated things. In other words, there are some things where flags pop up. No major crisis in front of us, but enough flags for us to
Until there's a cyanobacteria bloom.
stay focused.
But it's
Until there's a
mentioned-
cyanobacteria bloom that gets in the town's drinking water supply, then we'll have the.
Yeah, but that's been
Or the Bear
kind
Island
of-
people.
That's been,
Mhm.
you know,
That's
we haven't
happened
really
too.
had that for the last couple of years.
Yeah, and it's anyone's guess as to why that's happening, you know, and we can't just let our guard down because we haven't had a bloom in the last year or two. It was only a year ago or so that we had a bloom on Bear Island. And the year before that, we had a big bloom in Meredith Bay, and the years before that, we had continuous blooms on Waukesha. So we can't let our guard down. Because we have good water quality, we need to double down to make sure that collectively we protect it. And so there's a little bit more.
Because as time marches on, you're not gonna